Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a play that I read, one that is finally not a Shakespearean play, although it is by somebody who is near to Shakespeare in terms of geography. I am referring to a play that is about a bet between two British gentlemen and a flower girl who is made into a lady. I am referring to Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, which was published in 1913. For those who don't know, George Bernard Shaw, who is a pretty big name, he's one of the well-known Irish playwrights of his time. Was an Irish playwright, of course, known for writing Man and Superman, which I've always heard about but haven't read. I think I should probably check that out. Notably Pygmalion, which was turned into the musical My Fair Lady, as well as a couple of other works. And he received a number of accolades during his time, noted as being very similar to Shakespeare in terms of the theater and the quality of his writing there. Although some people have also soured on his work, especially given his political beliefs and his ideology at the time, notably being for interracial marriage and against anti-Semitism, although he also praised Hitler and praised Mussolini and praised Stalin. So, what his actual beliefs are problematic, and it's important to know that because those kind of beliefs influence his writings, and it's something that should be considered. But yeah, I don't know too much else about George Bernard Shaw beyond the fact that he's one of the big names. He did have a hand in getting some of his works published or turned into movies, especially Pygmalion in the 1930s. So that's pretty cool to be around for the invention of cinema and also to be able to influence your work and to be turned into that fairly new medium. But without further ado, let's talk about Pygmalion, which I got from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Pygmalion takes place in London, presumably around 1913, focusing on three main characters, Colonel Pickering and Henry Higgins, who are both language people, linguistic kind of folks studying language, not just of the English language, but of other languages at the time. And Higgins is so good that he's able to pinpoint where people are from just by their accent. They meet on a rainy London night, and while they're waiting for a cab along with another family, which includes a guy named Freddie, they run into a flower girl named Eliza, who they find very irritating because of the manner in which she speaks and because she's kind of brash as well. And she cons them into buying a bunch of flowers, and Henry notes that he could turn Eliza into a regal lady and have people believe it in no time because of his skill and his ability to teach the finer points of English. Eliza goes home but remarks that she would probably feel better if she was able to engage in some of the things she wanted to do in life that were held back by her how she spoke. And so the next day she shows up at Higgins' house, where Pickering and him are having a conversation. And Pickering and Higgins decide to bet on whether or not they can turn Eliza into, or pass her off as a lady. Eliza insists on paying for this, but Higgins says that he'll cover it with the winnings from his bet. And at that point, Eliza's father shows up, who's revealed to be somewhat of a con artist. And he's like, "Oh, you can't have my daughter unless you give me like 5 shillings or something like that." And it's unfortunate that that's the way that her father views her, but that might also be reflective of the time, how women did not seem to be viewed as human beings in the eyes of men. And from there, once Higgins reluctantly pays it, he gives Eliza lessons, which seem to be a bit of a struggle for her. A short while later, as she's engaging in the lessons, she practices with Freddie's family, who shows up again, and they manage to convince Freddie and the family that she's somewhat of a regal, like, lady type figure. Although the way she speaks suggests that you can teach her new manners of pronunciation and whatnot, but you're never going to be able to take away her experiences in life, which only seems to frustrate Higgins a little bit more. A short while later after this, they're all invited to a fancy party, and Higgins's student Nepomuk shows up, who it says that he's like using Higgins's knowledge to wow everybody else and also make a bit of money. And Nepomuk sees Eliza and takes a fascination to her, and he reveals to others that Eliza isn't who she seems. Although he's right in guessing that, he actually guesses that she must be Hungarian royalty, because the way she speaks is a little too perfect, because it's like how someone who was taught English would speak rather than someone who was a native speaker. And at that point, Higgins has won the bet, and he's very proud of himself, and they all head home. But Eliza is mad at Higgins because Higgins has suggested that, like, oh, we're through, this is over with. And Eliza's worried about being just tossed aside when Higgins is done, whereas she can't really go back to where she came from in that way. And Higgins is frustrated that Eliza is being defiant, and they storm off and separate at that point. And when Eliza is by her lonesome, she meets Freddie, and they make out, which annoys the police officers who are about, and they kind of indicate that they want to get married. As the story comes to an end, Eliza returns home and has a confrontation with Higgins, where she's kind of condescending to him, beautifully condescending towards him, speaking as a lady rather than addressing him as herself, which Pickering laughs at. But Higgins is very frustrated and asserts that he made her who she was, and that she has no right to leave him or do anything else, and that she's always going to stay by her side. But Eliza kind of just leaves at this point, although Higgins seems to believe that she's going to stay, even though she has said she's intent on being with Freddie, who Higgins believes is worthless and like it won't amount to anything. And so as the story leaves, we're kind of left to see Higgins in his delusion of believing that Eliza might stay any longer. In terms of analysis, George Bernard Shaw presents us with quite a bit to think about with this interesting play. What's fascinating is I read this in high school, and I guess I didn't understand it at the time. I was really frustrated that Eliza and Higgins didn't end up together, and I'm realizing now why that exactly is. Higgins is a real jerk face, among other things. I'm glad that I reread it because I gained more from it upon rereading it. But one of the things that Shaw talks about in this story is the idea of classism in London society. English society looks down upon people like Eliza. They see her as less than because of the way she speaks. They don't like that she doesn't have money. They make fun of like the various aspects about her. She appears dirty, and they just don't seem to like her or view her with as worthy of respect, like their fellow elite, wealthy, regal type friends. And what's worse is they seem to be infantilizing the poor, saying like, "Oh, you won't understand what this is. I have to explain it for you. I have to help you with this." Treating them like they're aliens in their own society that they live in, and it makes these individuals very frustrated. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you from this. "It's no use talking to her like that, Mr. Higgins. She doesn't understand you. Besides, you're quite wrong. She doesn't do it that way at all." And I just find that very interesting because the character Mrs. Pierce is suggesting to like Higgins that Eliza wouldn't understand you if you talked that way, if you talk to her like a regular human, because she's less than human or something like that. Like Mrs. Pierce doesn't really see Eliza as worthy of respect at the start of the story, and she changes her mind, of course. But the way that she's viewing her it suggests that there's a lot of classism going on. And another character who has this problem is Nepomuk, because when he's trying to guess who Eliza is, he guesses, oh, she must be royalty, like because she's learning English as an English language learner, but because of the way she's dressed, because of her appearance in high society, like she can't be poor or anything like that. That doesn't make any sense to him. And even when Higgins says, this is a girl I picked up off the streets, just a common flower girl from Drury Lane, like Nepomuk doesn't believe him. He thinks it's just a big old joke. And because like, how could this woman be from essentially the gutter? Because she's speaking she's speaking like very elegantly, like she's not using weird slang or anything like that. So she clearly can't be poor because only poor people speak in that certain way. But it's interesting to note that like the key to all of this difference that we see between the very wealthy and those who have less is the education. Like if all it takes to turn Eliza into a someone worthy of respect, someone who's regal and well presented, is an education of how to speak, then there clearly is no real difference between those who have money and those who not. It's merely an environmental factor. If Eliza had the opportunities that Higgins or Mrs. Pierce or Colonel Pickering had, she'd already have her flower shop by now, and she wouldn't be left to really be a poor girl selling flowers on the street. And so like I find it very interesting that Bernard Shaw is really noting that the key difference is education, suggesting that there's virtually no difference between the wealthy and the poor in society. And also noting that like even though Higgins may have money and come from a high place in society, he's still acting like a brute. He treats Eliza with disrespect, and he believes that he owns her and possesses her. He's not a good person. Like it's very clear that Shaw wants you to see him as delusional and kind of a jerk towards other people, and that having money doesn't make you a better person. This really reminds me of Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, because they were talking about the same idea, where in Lady Chatterley's Lover, like even though the people who had money like viewed themselves as the elites of society, oftentimes they had their own heads up their asses, and they couldn't really see what was right in front of them, even though it was happening. I do like that in Lady Chatterley's Lover, but I feel like it's much better presented here, because it feels like Shaw has made it a choice here, whereas D.H. Lawrence seems to have suggested that maybe the wealthy are in their place in society because they deserve to be there. Like it's a very elaborate, weird kind of lesson where he's copping out at times. But very interesting exploration of classism here by Shaw. Another thing worth exploring in this play is the relationship between Henry and Eliza. Henry sees Eliza as simply a project. I'm not even sure that he actually sees her as a human being until maybe later in the play, when he's like, oh, I want to be with you, Eliza. Like, you can't be with anyone else. You can only be with me, because only I can possibly understand you. And he views her as property, and like a good example of that is when he buys her from her father, essentially for like 5 shillings or however much it cost. Like it's clear that at that point he sees her as his, and he's entitled to her. So when she begins to be defiant and object to the way she's being treated, and calls Higgins out, rightfully so, like he's indignant about it. He's like, no, how dare you call me out on this? That's wrong. I created you. Only I can demand certain things from you. And so it's interesting to see how this relates to the title of Pygmalion, because the story of Pygmalion, Greek mythology, was that of a sculptor who made a painting or a work of art and fell in love with it. And then I believe it was Aphrodite or Adonis or somebody breathed life into it and created something. And the story progresses from there. And that's what happens in this story. Higgins sculpts Eliza into a shape using his language lessons. And then she becomes to life through these lessons, or she was already brought to life in these lessons. And Higgins believes that he's entitled to this, that this is my creation and only I can have access to her now. And there's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. "You let her alone, mother. Let her speak for herself. You will jolly soon see whether she has an idea that I haven't put into her head or a word that I haven't put into her mouth. I tell you, I have created this thing out of the squash cabbage leaves of Covent Garden, and now she pretends to play the fine lady with me." Which is very interesting on the part of Higgins. The way he just comes off like, oh, I created this woman. She doesn't have an original thought in her head. Like, everything that she does is because of me. And so we'll see if she does anything differently. Kind of being arrogant in the process and not realizing that Eliza is a whole ass human and capable of thinking for herself. And so I think Shaw is turning Pygmalion into a very sort of negative twist here, where Higgins refuses to see Eliza as a human being. And maybe you could see this as a reflection of what's going on in London society at the time, where the wealthy men kind of boss around poor women, not realizing that they're thinking, feeling creatures who are capable of saying, I'm going to kick you to the curb or something like that. And so I really find this fascinating, how Shaw builds off the Pygmalion storyline and also establishes Eliza and Henry's relationship as very troubled from the start. Like, there's no redeeming Henry, in my opinion. Like, no matter how much it seems like Eliza might end up with him, because we sometimes accidentally fall for our abusers. It really seems like he's a bad choice for her overall, and it's better that she ends up with someone like Freddie. And then there are a couple of items that aren't so good about this play. Freddie, for instance, as much as I say that it's good that he ends up with Eliza, he still feels like a vague character. Like, Shaw hasn't finished fleshing him out and presenting him as an actual character for Eliza to fall in love with. He's just presented a couple times throughout the story, and not given much of a development, which is unfortunate. And that really seems to be a problem throughout the play, how it seems like Shaw is speeding through various elements of the plot. Eliza's father just shows up and then leaves, and Shaw kind of speeds through the lessons that Eliza takes. So we don't really see any elements of that you might have seen in the musical My Fair Lady. So I think that the musical does elaborate more on the scenes that are kind of glossed over in the play. So that's not enough to hurt this play overall, but it is stuff that Shaw could have worked on. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. A pretty good play. One of the better ones that have been written in the 1900s, and one that I think stands the test of time, because especially as men consider women objects in this day and age, we'll see more examples of this, where men think, oh, I created this woman, so she belongs to me. No one else can have her. Kind of a sort of very negative, very pessimistic take on the Pygmalion Greek myth that we know from the mythology. So if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Pygmalion. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about George Bernard Shaw if they don't already know about him, and Pygmalion, which was taught to me in high school. So I have a feeling that a lot of people might already know about this story or the musical that came out later. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Greek mythology travels. Farewell.